Have you been asked to sew patches onto a leather vest for one of your friends and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know if I like you enough to do that? Are you kidding? Leather? You need to take that somewhere else. I'm going to show you how to sew patches onto a leather vest and not regret being the kind friend and doing the favor. Or if you yourself want to sew your own patches on your own vest so you can save the money and not have to take it in to have somebody else sew it for you, well, stick around. I'm going to show you how. If you want to make sure that you don't change the actual fit of something like this, you're going to need to open up the lining and use the free arm of your sewing machine so that you can sew around a patch. I tried using a hand sewing needle in this case because I didn't want to take the lining out. You know how it is. We don't always want to have to take something apart just to sew something. But if you were to sew the patch over this area, it would affect the behavior and the functionality of these pockets. So I used my liquid-based glue and put some on the back of the patch. And I didn't have the jacket or the vest on a level surface, so I had to pin it. You could pin it in place to begin with and skip the gluing process. However, the glue took really nicely to this. It almost is as if this has already been sewn on, but it has not. This is a water-soluble product. So some patches have a bigger, broader satin stitch around the edge of the patch, and others have these skinny little lines of stitching. And needle position on your sewing machine will help you with this case. If you go too far in to a patch, well, then it's going to lift up. Like you see, this one lifts up a lot on the edge, and eventually this patch will start to lose the stitching along the edge. So my preference is to actually sew in through the stitching sometimes when your seam or your stitching line isn't finished as nicely as this patch. And this one, because of its unusual edges, it would take a long time to stitch around that. I'd have to stop, lower the needle, pivot, stop, lower the needle, pivot, and work my way around. So in this one, I'm going to actually use a free motion process. Some patches have a fusible film already attached to the back, but if you've ever tried to iron on leather, you know that the heat of the iron will not go through and melt that onto the item. And you're also at risk of causing this to be shiny and damaging the look of the leather. In addition to that, if you were to like push steam onto the leather to try to get through the patch, the steam will push out and burn you. So the best thing to do is to not iron if you're going to sew a patch onto a real leather item. We have two options for sewing on patches with the Creative Feet line of sewing machine feet. The Pearls and Piping Foot, it has a tunnel beneath it that will ride right over the top of a patch like this. And it pretty much will guide you so that your needle will not miss sewing right along the edge of that thick satin stitching. But in this patch, because the width of the stitch is so narrow, I would prefer to use the Satinedge foot, because the Satinedge foot has this little guide that allows us to push up against the side of the patch. And it will prevent my needle from skewing away from the edge of that. So why wouldn't I always use this foot? Because sometimes it's easier to just use that one if the patch is designed with a thicker satin stitch. And it's always about doing the easiest, most efficient, fastest process, right? Because time is money, and if you're not in business, time is keeping you from riding away on your bike with your nice leather vest. So you can see I put one pin going horizontally and one vertically to keep it from shifting as I'm going to sew with a free motion foot and just go around that. And loosen and remove the snap-on adapter that came on my sewing machine and put it somewhere safe so you don't lose it. And this is a free motion foot, which allows you to move fabric in different directions instead of sewing in a straight trajectory. We're going to drop the feed dogs as well, which allows us to also move the fabric in any direction. And this means I won't have to turn the vest as I sew. Now, this little arm right here sits on top of your needle bar screw, so you want to make sure that you tighten the screw with something other than just your fingers, because as that foot hits the needle bar or the needle bar hits the foot, you can end up loosening that screw. So make sure you use a screwdriver just a little bit tighter than finger tight. Don't break that screw off by using the screwdriver to its full strength. And this fits onto the bar, and I'm going to also screw that tight with a screwdriver because this foot, well, the way it bounces around can loosen that screw, and the last thing you want is a loose screw and your foot falling off on you. So the challenge here is that I have to get my hand in here and pull this fabric out of the way and flatten out this leather. So it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. And then I got to be able to get the lining to not be underneath the needle when I stitch that. So this is what you'd call a slow as you go kind of sewing process. I have invisible thread on, and I highly recommend you always use the nylon version of the invisible thread, as it is stronger than the polyester. The correct needle to use for leather, because it doesn't have a weave where the needle can push through and push the fibers aside like a universal needle does. Universal needle, top stitch needle, quilting needle, embroidery needle, they all have rounded tips. If a rounded tip needle hits a solid object, it breaks. In fact, you should celebrate every time your needle breaks because it stopped your hook in your sewing machine from grabbing a needle and ripping apart the underworkings of your machine. They are actually designed to break. So what is unique about a leather needle is it has a triangular tip on it, and it actually cuts and slices into the fabric. And that slice, it can never come back because it's literally cutting through it, which is why you don't want to use a leather needle on a woven fabric because you will stretch that fabric and then the whole seam will tear apart. So using the correct needle is important for those of you who wonder why there are so many needles and think there must be really just nothing to that. I'm just going to use the same needle until it breaks. And well, you'd be certain to break it if you don't switch to, in this case, I'm using a 16 needle, 116 tip. And what's going to happen is it's going to cut this triangular shape, goes down through the fabric, and as the needle exits, it's going to lift up this little triangular piece like that and then close back down on the thread, keeping the stitch in the fabric. And that is how your leather needle works. They're fabulous. And also I use an 80-12 leather needle for sewing through sequins in case you want to sew through sequins with our sequins and ribbon foot. Okay, so I got the lining out of the way for sure, and now I'm going to stitch around this using free motion without a hoop because this fabric is so rigid all on its own. I don't need to support it with a hoop. The free motion foot is going to hop and allow me to just stitch down like that. I recommend if you need glasses to wear them, and the goal is to sew right along the edge of the stitching line. So a couple stitches forward and then go back to secure the stitch. You can hear it exiting the fabric and snapping. That's the sticky nature of the leather grabbing hold of that needle. Then you just continue all the way around. The more you move the fabric with every stitch the needle makes, the longer the stitch is. And as long as there isn't going to be a lot of things rubbing against this, then having a longer stitch should hold this patch just fine. Using a regular foot, I would have to lower the needle and turn the entire vest, spin this whole thing around, and then sew down the next, and then repeat that on all four sides. A square patch, not that big a deal, but still getting all of this heavy leather into the inner area of the bed of the machine would be quite a challenge. So with the free motion foot, I'm able to just move it like that. And that's the reason the free motion foot is the best option for this particular project. I keep checking to make sure that the lining has not found its way back to beneath the patch. And now I'm going to push the fabric that direction. It's getting stuck on the free arm. And now I can just pull it toward me and go up the next side. I don't know if you can hear how loud it sounds as the needle exits, but don't be afraid. It is just the nature of working with high quality leather like this. If this was a Girl Scout vest, you would be able to use my Satinedge foot or pearls and piping foot. You can see right here I have the fabric getting stuck on the free arm, so I've got to get it up and make sure that it doesn't hinder my movement on going up further. And this is why we pin it in place first so it doesn't shift. Isn't it amazing how you can't see the stitch at all? And that is the invisible thread that we offer. And I'll tell you what, if all you're going to be sewing on is patches, you only need one spool of it. It should last you a lifetime. You can see how the patch is getting stuck on the toe of the foot. So I'm going to lift and just move it over just slightly. And once again, make sure the lining is all flat. And we are almost done with our patch. The speed of the machine is entirely up to your eyesight and your control of the fabric. Take your time. If you have a speed control on your machine, you can reduce the speed the machine runs. And now once again, we're going to go forward and back to secure that. And that patch is done. And then there's no evidence that you ever sewed the patch on. Just need to hand sew the lining, these two lining pieces back together again, which an ordinary hand sewing needle should be adequate for. You're not having to go through leather to hand sew that together. The next patch that I'm going to sew on is so much easier because it's up here and I don't have to remove lining to sew it on. In this case, I'm going to use my pearls and piping foot. The pearls and piping foot comes packaged individually like this in a reclosable container that has the ability to be opened and then closed again. And inside of this package is an illustrated instruction booklet on how to use the foot for several different things. The patch sewing, however, is not in this instruction. It's just an added bonus to the many different things that you can use this foot for. And it also fits all sewing machines, no matter how new or how old the sewing machine. And this is how that is possible. The pearls and piping foot, as with all three, the Creative Feet has a 7mm wide bar that allows your traditional snap-on adapter to just simply attach right onto the bar. If yours is either wider or narrower than the 7mm width, then you'll select from one of the adapters that's included in the kit, and it snaps on to the foot. So this would be the one that if you have a 9mm wide machine, you would use the B adapter. Remove your machine's snap-on adapter and replace it with ours. This may also make it possible for you to actually use the feet that came with your prior machine. So if you have a Janome sewing machine and you've had several in the past and you've bought a lot of feet for the machine years before, and now you have a new machine and maybe you still have your old one, well, you can take the feet from your older machine and put it on your new machine using the B adapter that's included in the kit. Each of these adapters are different in height and also some other elements that make it possible for you to use even the really old sewing machines all the way back to the Singer Featherweight. Now with the Singer Featherweight machine, you don't have needle position capability, but yes, you could even use it on a featherweight machine to sew a patch on. That's absolutely possible. If you have a Bernina sewing machine, there are two different low shank adapters available. One for newer models that has a squared off look to the top of it, and one for the older Bernina sewing machines that's rounded. You may also have one of their snap-on adapters that will snap right on to our pearls and piping foot. That allows you then to slide this up and pull down the lever. If you have a Pfaff sewing machine, you're going to use the lowest or the shortest of our 4 adapters that comes with the foot. and pretend this is your machine's presser foot bar. You'll remove your machine's presser foot adapter and place it somewhere else where it's safe. And then remove the screw, restart the screw into the post, slide our smallest adapter up and under it, tighten that with a screwdriver, and then attach it like that. And then you can snap our feet right on to that adapter. So I hope that helps you understand how you can use our pearls and piping foot on your sewing machine, no matter how new or old it is, as long as you have the desire to do this, you have the tools available at creativefeet.com. The pearls and piping foot has a uniquely shaped tunnel that centers things inside of it so that when you're sewing along, you don't have to watch the sewing machine needle at all. It will be locked in position based on the bump of that stitching line. This washer moves the item over. If you can't get your needle right where you want it, try taking the foot off and sliding the washer to the opposite side, and then you'll see that your needle has moved over. So what you do is you first place the foot on the machine using either the adapters, or in the case of my machine, I just snap it right on. Place the foot on the patch so that the stitch falls under the tunnel on the foot. That would be awesome if it sews in that position, because it's right on the edge of the actual patch. So there isn't any way anything can get caught on that stitching line. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a try and see if the foot will hold in place all the way around that very, very edge of the patch. I raised my feed dogs up, so a couple stitches, and you can see how the foot takes the leather right through. It doesn't get stuck. So a stitch in place. This ties a knot. And right now I have the machine set at a 2.5 millimeter stitch length. Normal tension. Straight stitch, just sewn right through there. Come to the end and lower the needle. Lift the foot. Now this is what's different than doing it free motion, is now we have to swing the fabric around. And that can be a little challenging if you have a messy table, so make sure you have a nice neat surface to start with. And then we go ahead and once again line it up. And it's pretty much kind of locked into that tunnel. And then it just takes it right through without me having to pull the fabric through. Stop with the needle down when you need to turn, lift, spin it around, and continue all the way around the patch. Another hint is to reduce the foot pressure. That's how much the presser foot pushes down against the fabric. When you know that you have a reduced pressure, you should be able to raise the foot with your finger. So you can see this little nut right here. I push up and I can see that I have very light pressure. If the presser foot pressure is pushing down really hard against the fabric, well, it may make the leather stick to your sewing machine. Look inside of your machine's instruction booklet for presser foot pressure, and then you'll know how to adjust it on your machine. As I swing the vest around, I also plant my finger on top of it to help the needle not get moved around a lot as I manipulate this heavy fabric around. Go ahead and secure the end of that. Cut the thread. There you have it. And what a nice gift to do for your friends or for yourself. If you're in a club and you like to add patches to your vest or garments, because you can use the same techniques for a baseball cap should you want to do that. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to sew patches onto garments. And if you did, go ahead and hit that like button. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I sure hope you'll do so today. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.